Colleen and I had met last year, I think it was, and we were talking about ways where we could help raise the knowledge level of startups. And particularly, there were challenges as people were raising capital, dealing with financial institutions, and really getting from an idea stage into formulating companies and getting started, advisory boards and those types of things. So what we did originally was take a real kind of, this is governance 101. And now this presentation, it's the same slides as you saw before, if anyone had seen it before, but our approach is going to be sort of a second year class or 201. So I may make the same jokes, I may make the same comments, but I'm going to try to raise awareness. And if there are things that people don't understand, I'll try to give a bit of background to them as I go in. So I'll just start up. So we're going to go through advisory committees and boards of directors, and we're going to be far more strategic again this time than we were last. Understanding everyone's perspective and goals before, during, and after a capital raise, selecting investors for reasons beyond their capital. There is nothing wrong with dumb money as long as you want to do dumb things. If you're looking for smart money, you should be attracting smart investors. And those are investors that are trying to elevate you and will give you more value than just their money. So we're going to talk about that, being prepared for the first meeting and for the first board meeting and what to accomplish, and then moving beyond the capital raise with investors. So I'm going to blow through again some of the initial stuff fairly quickly, and then we'll hopefully are setting the stage, and then we'll get into some more detailed conversations. So, you can read what's on the screen there, but for the most part, I'm thinking of very specific things in my day jobs that would lead me as running. Although I am experienced with respect to a number of different things, I'm finding myself in Europe actually raising capital for and looking at technologies to bring into a fairly broad scale investment company. So when I was at a meeting on Friday, or all day Friday, and then dinner on Friday night. When I think about people who are going to be an investor, an advisor, and board member, I had this conversation live, and where I think and I apologize for anyone who's into crowdfunding and those types of things. I would like to be very honest that when you do have people that are in fact listening to what you have to say. Sorry, I've just got notes coming in. If you want to have investors that are listening to you and really trying to drive your value beyond an economic return, you really should be strategic. So when you're looking at not just the fact that they have capital, but can they open doors for you? Do they have an innate sense of supporting you as an entrepreneur, or supporting you and your technology team as an entrepreneur? How much involvement have they had with respect to showing entrepreneurs what it takes to go to the next level? And can you actually understand what those other investments that they've made, the type of value propositions? So I'm just going to paraphrase what I was dealing with last week. So, fairly wealthy, very, very wealthy family by European standards as well. So what we're looking for are very specific people that'll be able to advise us in terms of getting the capital from this particular group. We're looking for ultimately investment capital, but likely we're going to be selecting one board member from this group. And what that board member does, so I've spent the last 12 months developing a strategy that will allow us to execute on probably 6 or 7 strategic things. What we know now is that, what I'm appreciating better now is that the investor actually wants to decide what my strategies are going to be. So maybe I started with, let's say, 6 strategies or verticals I wanted to put my money into and work on projects specifically underneath. And what they're going to do is take off 2 and they're going to add 2. So what you have to be really clear about is, okay, first of all, do they have the right to do that today? No, but if I want their money, they're going to want I'm going to have to acquiesce. Are those things that I need to do, or those things that I want to do? And as they're making those inflection points or changing my directions or forcing me to pivot, and they're not bad in this case, they're certainly not bad. Otherwise, we would have stopped conversations. The opportunity, I think, is to really learn about what they can, what they can learn or sort of what I can learn about them, and then how I can learn in the process about changing my business. So this is fairly large, hundreds of millions of dollars raised, but for the most part, you would have this if you were doing an app or if you were bringing a new technology. Are you actually bringing the people that are going to help you, and do they have your best interests in mind at the same time that they're trying to manage their own interests? So I would always recommend doing a deep dive. I'm not a crowdfunding or crowdsourcing type of person, so I always want smart money, and I would really have people and suggest to people that you do some really serious due diligence about those people when you're bringing them in. Again, at the cash stage or just on an advisory board or a board table. There we go. So there was a question that popped up. I'm going to try to answer them as I go. Okay. I guess we'll answer those at the end. So never mind. So an advisory committee, again, using a different example now, an advisory committee is really different because we're looking for very specific, like often laser or very sector specific experience. So we're doing a bunch of things that are relating to regulatory environments, different food and transportation regulatory environments. So we're trying to pick people who have that type of knowledge to do something specific with respect to setting up our quality assurance environment in one country so we can export elsewhere, to look at people who can provide logistic support or give introductions to logistic support. So I'm looking for very specific sector skills that are going to be able to bring my company to my investment to the next level. So when you're starting to think about an advisory board, I don't think you can start too early. I don't think anyone has ever said that they wish they would have waited 6 months or a year to start an advisory board. Often what I see in startups, certainly in Europe, but elsewhere, is that companies often have advisory boards sometimes before they even incorporate, because you're really trying to pull the particular sector of the economy or sector of the community for knowledge and help you, refine your product or refine your service to the point where you actually think that you can. That you can actually think you can execute on a minimal viable product, or take your science from a bench scale all the way to pilot, and you need people with those types of skills. Once you set up your advisory board, there is, and I think we've got a slide on this. I'm just going to double check here, but sorry. It's terrible. I think that I would start looking for your board members likely anywhere from 3 to 12 months after you set your advisory board, or these people that are going to help you take your product to the next level. Often when you look at getting third-party financing, your financing companies or your investors are going to expect it to be something other than you or your friends or your family to be on your board, and you want to be able to really be thinking about when you need to, if you want money, then therefore in 9 months, and it's yourself, your partner, and maybe a parent who's sitting on your board because they've got some experience. You want to start thinking, probably if it's 9 months out, you probably have to start thinking about your board of directors now. And I think that with the longer that you have really the start of your revenue stream, the shorter you'd want to have your selection of your board of directors. And the reason is because you need sort of an adult, we would call it an adult in the room. If you're looking at a multi-year project, it's multi-millions of dollars before you get the first $50,000 in your bank account. An investor or a financing company will often want to have a serious board of director or a member who's outside, who can actually look and make sure you're doing things right. And so again, you should be polling. I'm picking on some of the people here. If you're in food, I would talk to Mehmet and Kendra at the food center. I'm sure the food center, so you can ask me too, but I don't. I know my business more than I know other people's. Gap, Collabs. I mean, these are great places to start looking for people who are interested in terms of helping people take their companies to the next level, but also more specifically helping entrepreneurs get that experience. There's a lot of people in the Saskatchewan community or Saskatchewan community that are willing to help, even if it means a bit of hard work before something pays off. So when you then go to you have your basic construct. I'm going to have a couple people on my advisory board. In my case, I've got a technical. We're doing very specific processes. We have a finance advisory board, technical science. We have a financial, and then we have a general one. And what we've done is ensuring that there's really good representation all the way through. And I think there's also an expectation of how you are going to grow as an entrepreneur and setting goals for yourself, but also in helping your company get to that next level. Because if you're not doing that, you're never going to get to the point that you're going to actually either be successful or raise the capital. So there are people that do this, developing terms of reference, and I would really suggest it, because I think that setting out the expectations for your advisory boards, I do my advisory board people under sort of like a contract agreement. Boards of directors are a little bit different. So they're not just really bound to you under contract. They're actually bound to you under law. So I am not an attorney. Met one once. I don't, most attorneys I like, some of them I challenged with, but the reality is that these are very specific explanations of fiduciary responsibilities when you become every company I'm a director of because I live in Saskatchewan. I'm responsible for unpaid PST. I'm responsible for unpaid, I think, GST, unremitted source deductions. I'm also for unpaid wages to a certain statutory limit. And so there's a whole bunch of things I become personally liable for when I'm willing to do that. So those things you should be managing with an attorney. Never, and hopefully nobody out here would ever join a company, a board of director, without totally understanding the risks that they're taking. They're not bad, they're all manageable, but you really need to do that. But as you're having your board of directors focus their reference points on making sure your company is executing on strategy that's set and agreed to by the board. But you're looking for the advisory board really to tell you the direction and maybe the mechanism that you're going to go from A to Z. So the advisory board may tell you, in order to get from A to Z, you may have to go through Q twice and loop around, and that's your advising board giving you experience, or utilizing their experience. But the board of directors are legally responsible for looking after the best interests of the shareholders. So you need to have the right people doing those things, but also you need to have the right frame of mind as an entrepreneur, or as whether you're a control 100% shareholder or a 20 group of 4 or 5 people that control a company. You all need to be in that right mindset. We've added some stuff this year. We actually had a presentation, Colleen, a couple months ago. I'm kind of losing my space of, or my reference and time. But when you're picking your board of directors, you should be looking at their competencies. So again, no offense, if my parents had joined my advisory board, would have loved it, but or my board of directors. But to be honest, they're not going to be having my best interests, or really the long-term interests in mind. You need to be able to have a competency other than being my parent. So what people do are looking at creating this framework, and all. It's going to be shown here, so you don't have to take notes if you are, but you look at some very specific things in terms of evaluating what the skills are you need at a particular point in time. And I think you're probably your hardest choice to add somebody to your board is probably your first one. Your second one always seems to be easy. The third one even easier. But then after that, if you're really serious about taking your company to the next level, and you need to add that, say, third or fourth person, you really need to make sure that they're meeting all the competencies. So as you're looking at this, you really need to search for people that will kind of augment your weaknesses. So, we've got described here as a skills or experience gap analysis in terms of your own or team's own. There's a number of things you can do for board evaluations and succession planning, and that's as you're getting into the longer term things. And the key criteria are that you would look at is financial knowledge, legal, communications, HR, et cetera, and all the way through. But the last ones, I think I just like to point out. So lived experience is often the one company I'm on the board of, the CEO gets the most experience or the most advice or the best advice from somebody he would consider an advisory board member, and he can just tell him in how to cut all these decisions down to its real core, which is, if you're not getting money for something, don't do it. You're not here to be friends with people, even if you are their friend. But when you're running as a CEO, you have to make hard decisions, and those people with that lived experience have maybe changed their perspective and can add that value from their 5 or plus years or 10 years of experience. Really can be helpful to you as a founder. ESG experience, that's all of those things are what I'm living in a role I'm here in Europe for, because it's all about ESG in terms of this raise I'm doing. And if you have people that look at, for example, the environmental, a lot of people can say, well, I recycle, and that, therefore I'm good on ESG. But in reality, when you look at how do you at the corporate level as well, when I'm selecting partners, I'm looking for partners that can actually demonstrate what they're doing, and not every company can do that. I'm looking at people who are actually bringing diversity to their board and changing their governance structure, and people that are really committed to moving back to how these societal goals are necessary to meet our global goals as humanity. The other thing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, If you're looking around the table and everyone looks like you've probably made a bad decision in terms of your advisory board and or your board of directors. So be very cautious in terms of creating groupthink, people who are not going to challenge you. So how you do that is, you can look at their skills and competencies. You may, for example, with some investors, you may be forced to take somebody as an investor. So then again, going to the earlier point, if you're forced to take somebody on the board because they're going to be an investor, you should be evaluating their investment and their ability to add value based on these key areas. So this, I think, was an example. But if you kind of look at it, somebody with the real life corporate experience, and that could be either in, you can have C-level experience in a different set. You don't have to be, there's only so many board directors of Nutrien and Cameco to go around. So people with actual experience in terms of managing an organization larger than yours, or who have taken that part of their life, their business life to that next level is important. You've finance, very specific on IT and cyber manufacturing experience. I've got zero social media experience. So for a lot of this stuff that I do, I actually look very deeply at, is there somebody around the table who's going to be able to help me manage social, legal, international, total governance experience. There are people who are, there are designations you can get for the, for being trained in a very Canadian and U.S. specific. They're also over here in Europe, and people who are familiar with either regulatory environments in general, but hopefully more specifically the regulatory environment. If you're doing a health app or a health service, the regulatory parts of those things are actually likely more critical than you'd otherwise think. So as we're going into kind of this next part, it's really understanding everyone's perspective. So you've got the people you're interested in. I need to raise $500,000 for my next to get my business from point A to point Z, and I know I've got a pathway. So before you do the raise, really have deep conversations. A lot of people can do this on their own, but I think a lot of people who go into those conversations without having the knowledge and the input from other people who have been there, done that. Again, talking to people at Cultivator and Collabs and Egg West, people who have actually had hardcore experience with helping their companies go to that next level. Understanding what each of you want in terms of what you think, what your business needs, what your advisors think you need, and what the investors think they need. What are the things that are critical? And you're going to, as you start asking those questions, raising capital now is more difficult probably today than it's ever been in my professional career. I won't tell you how old I am, but there was probably one other time. And Mark, you would probably remember those dark days. Yep. But the challenge. Yeah.
So 5 minutes, okay?
Oh, come on. Okay, so
5 minutes for the slides.
Okay, yeah. For the slides. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things you really should think of, because if it's going to take time, it's going to take more time today than it normally would. Thinking of kind of pre-reviewing with an attorney about what your shareholder agreements might look like, because you know what rights you need to give up. And after talking to your attorney, you have to be flexible but very firm so that you don't end up in a bad situation. And then after that's during the raise, after the raise, again, creating this optimal board structure and making sure that you have a decision-making framework that does not isolate you and your own executive team from the input that your board and your advisory board are trying to provide you. Because if you have them there, then you should be using them. Because if you're not using them, then don't have them. You're just going to look worse on a subsequent raise. I thought I had missed that slide. So when you get into director and officers' responsibilities, and again, I'm not an attorney, and there's nobody who is an attorney who's sitting on the panel or sitting at the front there. So you have obligations. Understand what you, as likely a shareholder and a director, what your obligations are, but then knowing what you are getting into, but what others on your behalf are getting into, what duty of care means. There's a whole bunch of case law that kind of supports this thing, but exercising care and diligence and skill and considering information. And if you can't do that, if you don't have somebody on there, having an incompetent member of the board is worse than having somebody that's going to fight you, because that incompetent board member will literally let you go off the cliff without knowing what they're doing. The duty of loyalty, when you are dealing with issues, this typically doesn't come up until you're in litigation, but you have a duty of loyalty to the company as a director. So when you are a director of a company, you have to be honest, in good faith, asking the best interests of the corporation, not yourself or not your investor. It's the best interests of the corporation. And when you're bringing people in, you should interview everybody with that. Frame of mind. The first, I know the slides are going out, so preparing for the first board meeting, I won't go into anything on that. But just make sure you're bringing people in who can create that conversational, and that there's the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, which is a decision that leads up to potentially a motion that's passed at the board and becomes a resolution. Really thinking about what it is that's going to ensure that your company and your entity is going to survive the longest. Always do this with legal counsel and make sure that you're doing everything. And then this is something I always say is, when you're going beyond the capital raise, what happens in that first, 4 weeks to 4 months to 4 years after you've done a capital raise? Have you done everything when you started this? Did you begin with that end in mind? Asking for strategic help when necessary. So one of our speakers we were hoping to have there on the 9th couldn't make it, but she had a comment. There are people that are very good in terms of setting up governance structures, typically for the larger boards or more complex organizations. But there's a lot of self-learning you can take online about how to do this, and there's some resources that we'll share with you as well. Making sure that you have you don't want to be friends with your board members, but you are engaging with them outside of meetings, because I think it's important to build relationships so that they're very transparent. And then really, again, going back to that decision-making framework, that it's something that your investors will tolerate. It's something that's going to help you go to that next level with your company, and really truly understanding what it is. Every company is different when you get to those inflection points, but how do you make those decisions? And when you have tough decisions, what do you do? And those are the kind of those core things that some of those things are worth millions of dollars in valuations and those types of things. So just some additional, you'll see this on the slides, some Council of Canadian Innovators for Governance Resources, the ICD. These ICD designations are known all over Canada and into the US, and there's some other US ones as well. And then if you're looking at either finding or working with people who are in the municipal or public sector, there's some other things to do there as well. And I think that is all we've got. And this is some archive sessions where you can see what we did last year. I think my notes my jokes were different. So
Thanks, Blair. You sound so sick. So thank you for spending time with us and doing this. I'm going to summarize. There was 2 questions right off the bat that just talk about, do you pay people or not? So we'll just deal with that one right off the bat, and we'll all answer that one. So for startups, it's almost never, right? It's somebody that wants to help you in ways. That's my experience. How about Amy?
Yeah, it's somebody actually been there doing it, want to get back. They really care. They have the empathy for you when you start a company because they've been there and know it's not an easy something. And they're to support you, not only helping grow the company, but help an entrepreneur to help you develop skills and building that resiliency when at a very low time during this. Give an example right now where how challenging is raising capital. So you may run out of cash, you may under a lot of stress. You needed the board, some of the board directors, or even on your advisory, somebody there to support you. So yeah, so it's not about the pay.
Yeah. You will, if you look online, you're going to see all kinds of articles about compensation. That's usually for public boards, right? And that's where it's in a very different place than what we're talking about in this governance series.
For advisory boards and board of directors, what I've seen in the private companies is share options. That's what I've had, because you're looking at selling the company. That's usually the ultimate goal, or being taken out in a positive way, not taking them out like greasing them. So the people are taking a risk on you to some degree, and so share options is one way of doing it without putting out any cash.
What I did see in New Zealand, we're actually in an acquisition I'm doing in Italy. That's kind of what we do. But I'm seeing a lot more paid board members starting up at the beginning. So I think we're giving practical Canadian. That's the right thing I would do in Canada. As you get into other countries, it's just traditional that they get paid some sort of stipend, and it's not sometimes very small. But I would agree with everything that they're saying. So
we've got one question here in Saskatoon, and then we'll go online afterwards. So
repeat it so that everyone online.
Okay, go ahead, Kyle.
What
was your question?
It was more of a comment that
Yeah.
cover expenses, right?
Yep.
That's right.
Okay, so though, if you hadn't heard that, it is very common that yes, you cover expenses, but you're not actually paid. So yeah.
How does it work? So for example, if you bring in a board of director at the start, but over time as you grow, then there is, for example, compensation like shares or something like that. How does it work with the initial board of directors that came in just for goodwill, just helping you out, and then there's a discrepancy? How do you reconcile that?
Okay, so the question was, as your company is growing and as your board is evolving over time, if some of the people at the beginning weren't compensated, but then there's some sort of change, what has either of you guys as accountants or Blair, what have you seen?
Well, that
I've seen. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I've seen. You mean it's not really retroactive, but you give them something, because if you've got value out of them and they help get you to that point, it's a small community we have in Saskatchewan, and you wouldn't want to treat somebody poorly. If you are looking at somebody who's going to stay on in those subsequent raises, and now they're part of they've gone from a three directors to like 6, and everyone's going to get paid. You typically would give them, as Mark said, some sort of share allocation that's more perhaps slightly more substantial because they have been around.
And Ariel, is there any questions online we should go to?
One from Alfred that says, when you have major investors, how do you do effective due diligence?
What I've done in most cases is talk to one of their investee companies that they've invested in, and found out how the relationship was, what they've experienced. That usually is a good indicator of what will happen. But you have to take it with a grain of salt, because you don't know what the circumstances were. Where there could have been one things I always see is arguing over valuation till the very last minute. It usually sours the relationship long term, and so it could be an adversarial relationship to start with. That's not a good indicator of what would happen normally.
Yeah, I just to expand on that, I think what I've done is if it's a major investor, then hopefully you're not the first one, but I think you can, often people who are making those investments in startups, in Saskatchewan and Western Canada, it's pretty small. And when, all an investor group has to do is add something at the end, once or twice, to say, oh, by the way, we want this. And by the way, your valuation just dropped 10% because the NASDAQ shifted this way. Like, at some point, you have to be willing to walk away. So when I think about those things, and I open this up to other comments, is when you hear typically that one person that you hear a bad thing from may not necessarily be a representative of a population. But once you see two roaches, there's probably 100 in the walls. So there's probably way more things that you need to be concerned with. And therefore, once you start seeing them, it's time to run and re-strategize, because the money may not be worth it.
A couple other questions online. Are advisory committee members paid for their time in meetings? And what is meant by C-level experience?
So I think with advisory, it'd be similar to a board of directors. It's often not paid at a startup level. Sometimes Mark and I have gone to meetings and the payment was that we got beer and pizza, right? That's a much more common situation for advisory. And I'll admit that I put C-level on there. So sorry about that acronym, but I mean by C-level or C-suite, that's usually what the acronym for the executive or the senior leadership of a company.
Another one that came through. Do you normally have someone join a board for a set term limit, i.e. 2 years, which also mitigates things against the relationship going sour?
Yeah, I can go. Yes, certainly. Usually, you set a term. You usually set up a term, the time frame, and I think you just go back to what Blair said earlier. You want start with the end in mind. No, you need to have a framework. Decision frameworks for pre-screen the directors and advisory board members. And something goes wrong, you have a decision framework so you can follow the steps and procedures to avoid conflict later on. So and I think it's good to bring new blood to the board or advisory board as well when your company is scaling. What you're looking for as your company growing, the different skills you're looking for, experience that for your board as well as advisory may change. So I think set up a time frame is definitely the right way to do.
And with regards to terms, one thing that's really critical, I was the CFO of a public company, and it's a little different than a private, but you could use the same concept, is never have the same term for all your directors. Have them staggered, because the last thing you need is a new investor coming in and the whole board gets changed. You basically need like 1 and 2 year terms or whatever, so that you don't have the risk of the whole board possibly changing, because there absolutely has to be some continuity. The corporate conscience, what's been decided, why it was decided. You can't have that knowledge go.
So one of the questions I get asked a lot with my clients is what is the right size of number of people on a board? So I'm wondering what you guys think of that. Small at the beginning, bigger with time, but do you have a number that you like, or should there also be some people that are independent on that skill matrix as well as the institutional investor?
Personally,
Go
ahead, Dean. No, you go.
No, I was just saying, personally, when you start out, and I think it really depends on your competencies, like we talk about. What you need to probably ideally have a board for each function area. So if you weak yourself, that's your weakness, that you don't know enough, you don't know financials, maybe you should bring somebody strong with financials or CPAs on your board. So it really depends. I don't think there's a set, just 3 to 5 usually is good, but to start. But that's what I usually involved. What kind of others comments?
Blair?
Well, what I do with mine, and I don't know if it's the ones I've worked with, it was part of their governing documents. So when you set out your, I can't think of it. It's basically, it expires. Articles in bylaws, they expire every year. So you always have the ability to boot somebody or vote the island just by not voting for them. The question will be, if you don't do it, what do you do if you have a problem and you cannot get rid of it? So, I mean, with relationship, I've seen lots of director relationships going sour because you get somebody in who says they've got all the time in the world and they're brilliant to work with startup people, but it's a very unique skill set. So they might be really good in a corporate, a multi-layer corporate setting, but it's really more difficult to do things in startups. So if somebody wants you to, create things that don't fit your organization, you need to get rid of them faster. So I like the 1 year annual or expiration. So.
Hey, I'm mindful that it's time, even though we started late. So we'll keep going, but if either online or in person, if you need to go somewhere, thank you for your time, and we'll work out our technical difficulties for next time.
Okay.
We do have, there's a question over on this side of the room.
Right up here.
Oh, yeah. Arjun.
Yeah, so we keep on hearing companies raising capital like $1 million, $1 billion, and so forth. So is this given so there will be funding in series and possibly in advance, not in arrears. So is there a special a payback mechanism based on the ROI, or
no?
Let's say the whole money sinks. So, is there a mechanism? In the investors can.
The question is there a mechanism to pay back the investor usually set up? Not usually. Most investors I know are investing equity, which are shares. Their exit is based on selling the company or it being merger and acquisition taken over. So they're expecting that, and they're usually expecting it within 5 to 7 years. Usually that's the length of most funds. If you want to hold the company a lot longer than that, you usually have to go with a different mechanism to raise money. And that is a whole different discussion. Yeah.
So we have another question in the room.
I have a question that might derail the conversation a little bit, but I wanted to ask, when is the right time for a startup, at what stage for them to form a board of directors, advisors, I think happen sort of early on as you're trying to build things up. But when is it like officially you're creating advisory committee? When officially do you create board of directors? When does that happen? At what stage of a startup?
Okay, so the question is, when should you actually create that board of directors versus the advisory? We did cover it a bit, but let's say it a bit more succinctly. When you guys want to go, Blair's coughing on this. Yeah. Mark?
I would say that the board of directors has to be in place at least 6 months to a year before you raise money. So, and then the other thing is you're going to need at least one board member when you incorporate. And in order to access a lot of government money, you have to be incorporated. There are a lot of programs that don't, but you're going to have to look at incorporating. Once you've decided that you want to go for this thing, you kind of need to incorporate. So you can play with it for a bit as a whatever entity, a sole proprietorship or whatever, but you need to incorporate before you raise money. And that means a board of directors.
And just to add on that, so annually you need have a annual board director meetings. So if you just yourself, you technically when you sign the document, when you register the company, you can just yourself, but slowly you want to amend that document by adding directors, because how can you have an annual board meeting all by yourself? Like I was asking people just, you can have your board meeting with your cat, that still counts. So anyway, so that's why ideally, before the 1 year mark, so that you can actually file your annual board meeting, because when you file your annual return, the corporate document, you have to say you had an annual board meeting, when was held, and that kind of stuff.
And the cat can't put their paw on it.
Well, when I ran my consulting company, I would have my annual board of directors and take myself out for supper and have a little celebration.
You're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that, Colleen.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say that is good until you raise money. So when you have to raise money, absolutely, you have to have a board of directors.
Yeah. Blair?
Well, what would be this? There's a question that I'll read out actually, and I'm going to tie these two things together. So it says, family business often has serious incompetence when it comes to the board. How can one get around this? And it's often serious outcomes. So herein lies your example of having your cat as your board member, or is who's going to either agree with you. I'm a dog person, so cats never agree with me, so I'd never have them, but my dog would always agree with me. So if you have a family company where in fact there is some issues, not necessarily the word that's phrased is serious incompetence. We'll just say challenges with respect to, boundaries, and challenges with respect to, often you see this in first generation owners going to second generation owners, and they really don't want to give up control because it's their identity. If you got into a situation where you had a family member that wasn't ready to do this or couldn't do it, you should run, because for the most part, those stories never end well. They make TV shows about them. I think it's called Succession. And those things, those are all blown up for Hollywood. But to be honest, you see those in tons of first to second generation businesses. You need to have somebody with real character who can hand that off. So setting yourself up for failure and having a parent as a shareholder, it's nice to do, but it's really difficult to get rid of those people. So you should be thinking about that. And either your advisory board member should say, man, I'll come and work with you, but you got to get rid of your 80-year-old aunt as the director, because she's not as smart as Amy's cat. And so you really got to be really concerned with that. So I would say, how do you do it? You have to do it honestly and transparently. If you got to go to counseling or have an outside family friend come in and do it, somebody will tell reality. And if they can't talk realistic, can't say the truth in a safe manner, it's probably a slow and painful death. And I would run.
So one of the things that I've seen on boards when the boards are pulled together and there's a competency matrix is that sometimes in the meetings, people just talk about the thing that they're the subject matter expert on. So I was wondering what you guys might have on comments, like what have you seen that before, and how do you pull a board up to a strategic level so that everybody's looking forward in some sort of togetherness and breaking the patterns of like normal people behavioral patterns of people want to go to what they're expert in. So
I would say the biggest one is putting a good agenda together.
Yeah.
So you're focused and you've got your points in there that you want to cover, because it's very easy to say, well, we need to get to the next point, or we need to cover more than the one that I see in a lot of boards is they just want to talk about marketing. Well, yes, that's important, but product development's also important. And what kind of HR issues are you running into? Because you're not going to have a product if you got HR issues. So having, covering off all your major areas in the agenda is really important.
There was one more question about staggering terms. So how staggered would you recommend? Would some be 2, 2.5, and then 3, or further time periods apart?
I've always used 1 and 2. That's what I've always seen. I personally haven't seen other than that. There could be, I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, I can't add to that. I think you'd have the best knowledge. So,
okay, one last question, and then we'll call it a day. So, what about you've got an advisory board, you've got a board of directors, you're the founder. How do you manage expectations with your staff and your senior staff? Like, what should we talk about with the founders, so that they're able to make sure that the people in their company understand what's happening and the independence that there is from the advisory committee and from the board?
I can make a first comment, and really it's about transparency and honesty. So sometimes I have seen CEOs, startup CEOs say, well, my board told me to do this, and there's nothing I can do. It's my board. That means that you're hiding behind something. So I would be really transparent that either if the board made a decision or an advisory board member makes a recommendation and you're talking to the staff about it, it's real. The other thing is, I think if the staff that are there don't want you to have other input in making your company better, you should really think about your staff, because I don't think it's healthy for people to not have outside input. With the exception of Elon Musk, I think everyone has input in what they do. If there's an Elon Musk in the room, hey, I want to meet you, but chances are there's just not enough. And I'm not a big fan of his management style, but at least you're pushing and you're transparent about everything that you're saying, never hiding behind. So I don't know if that kind of starts the conversation off, but.
Yeah.
I just think it's communication. Like, there's a set way of communicating to your shareholders on a regular basis. There's a set way of communicating to your board of directors, so there's no surprises. Same thing with staff. Staff needs to be aware. The KPIs that you're discussing with your staff are likely a little different than the board of directors, but it's what's important to them, what's important that they feel secure. It's setting up a culture. I think, and making sure that everybody, like Blair said, it's transparent, but the decisions are made, operational decisions are made in the operations, board decisions are board decisions, but what affects somebody, they need to know.
Just to add to that, I think for the employees, it's important for them to understand the role and the responsibilities, the difference between the board directors versus the advisory. So advisory board do not necessarily have to access all your sensitive information. They don't make a decision for you. They're really just there to help you and give you advice. On the other hand, your board of directors are making decisions. So the employees may not necessarily need, like there has to be a fine line. They needed to understand that, so that in terms of communication, when it goes, so they know what the advisory board needed to know. There has to be a fine line between the both boards.
Good. Okay, one last call for questions, or are we good for today? Anything online? Nope.
Okay.
Well, thank you for coming out today. Mariel, did you want to say anything? Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to say a quick thank you to everyone, both in person and online, for putting up with us. We promise to be better. I guess the only way we can go is up. So we will be sending out the slides with a link to the recording, on our programming archive, and a short survey that we'd love for you to fill out and submit any questions that we can answer for you at the start of the next session. Please be nice on the survey. Also, if Colleen wants to give a quick sneak peek on what the topic will be for next Thursday, and then we'll wrap things up and let everyone go.
Absolutely, sure. And I'm just going to admit right off the bat that it was actually me that tripped. And so I'm the one that slowed things down today. Yeah. So I'm owning the fact that I'm the one that tripped and broke the computer stuff. So next week, we're going to be back here in this room, or we'll be online. And what we're going to be talking about is finance and governance. And we'll have a different main presenter next time. Blair's not able to be with us, and we're bringing in David Gauthier from Natural Products Canada, who's also had a lot of experience both in financing, on boards, in VC, so from a number of different views. And so next week's session is a lot of what we got feedback from you last winter. So people wanted to know more about finance and governance. And what David's going to talk to is actually a little bit more from what is enterprise risk management, what is risk mitigation, and he's going to talk about where different institutional funders are coming from and how they might interact with you in order to understand what your company is, build value, and help you mitigate risks. Okay, so looking forward to having you back a week from today, lunch here in Saskatoon and in Regina. So thank you very much.